Hi, Nancy from Metal here. We wanted to prepare a tutorial that would showcase how well some products in After Effects work together. So we brainstormed with Matthias Moll of Mama World and Ran Ben Avraham, and together we came up with this Bottledship parody. We create an animated 3D object with effects, all entirely in After Effects. We had a lot of fun putting this together, and we hope you enjoy watching it. So here's Ran with part 1 of the Bottledship parody tutorial.
Hey folks, I'm Avraham here, and today I have got a very sweet tutorial for you. And in today's tutorial we're gonna take the Hypno Precompilator we all know and love, and today it will go into an attack mode. So without any further ado, let's have a quick preview.
Surface contact 8,000 yards.
Is this some kind of exercise?
Probably. I want to have this thing thoroughly investigated.
Don't think that's a good idea! Got it, Chief.
Get out of there, Alex. That's not good.
What the hell is that?
Going in.
Okay, so this is actually going to be a two-part tutorial. In this part I'm going to cover the transformation to an attack mode. I'm also going to cover the plasma that forms on it and shoots out, which is combined out of forms and optical flares. And in the next part of this tutorial, Matthias from Mama World is going to show you how to rig the entire transformation and movement of the Hypno using his excellent script iExpression. Now, since I have already covered the building of the Hypno Precompilator in its original form in a previous tutorial, which you can find over at AE Tuts, and it's called How to Make the Hypno Precompilator. If you haven't seen this tutorial yet, I do suggest you jump over to AE Tuts right now, because in this tutorial for the transformation, I'm not going to cover it from base. I'm just going to take it from where we left it at the previous tutorial and show you the differences in this version. Let's start, shall we? In precomps, we've got the old precomps, which contains the old precompilator, and the new precomps. Their names are identical, except the old one has old in the front. So for an easy follow along, once again you can go into the previous tutorial and download the source project and easily follow along as I do the modifications. So once again, the Hypno Precompilator is combined out of a color map, a displacement map, and a reflection map. We'll start off as we did before with the color map. Let's open up color map base. We'll actually set up the old color map base right beside it so we can see the differences that were made. On the right we have the old Precompilator's color map base, and on the left is the new one. Now for an easy follow along, I've marked all the old unchanged layers in red, and the new layers and the changed layers are marked in yellow. If you already seen the previous tutorial on how to create the basic precompilator, you can easily follow along from this point on. We have the background. On top of it we have a blur layer. On top of that we have a nice texture of brushed metal. On top of that we have an adjustment layer with levels on top of it, where the gamma is set to 1.6. The change that was made to this layer as opposed to the old one is that we added a round mask to it. On top of that we got a nice blue ring. Another new layer is the Pupil, which is basically an ellipse shaped layer. If we'll open that up, we can see it's got a gradient stroke and a gradient fill. The gradient fill goes from blue to light green and light blue, and the gradient stroke is just white to black gradient. those are the only changes that were made to the color map base. Now let's switch to color map. In the color map, once again we have the color map base, which remains unchanged. Then we have a levels layer, again unchanged. The marble texture, unchanged. And on top of that we have a new layer, which was actually in the original project file, but wasn't in the previous tutorial. It's basically, let me isolate it for you a second here. Basically, it's a looped footage of a form layer, just animating there for your viewing pleasure. On top of that, we have the blue solid. On top of that, a ring, pupil, and bulge all remained unchanged from the original project. On top of that, we have two new layers, which starts at 3 seconds mark, and they both animate as well. Let's hit Q to see that. The red pupil animates from 3 seconds down the timeline over 2 seconds and creates this evil looking red eye. And on top of that we have the scratched metal texture, and its opacity is animated from 0 to 100 over again 2 seconds. We also have a small amount of animation on the marble, and it animates from the original look we have created for it to the original state. Or in other words, over 2 seconds we reset it. And again, these are the only changes that were made to the color map. Now let's switch to the real interesting part, the displacement map. Once again, on the right we have the old displacement map base, and on the left we have the new displacement map base. As you can see, the layers haven't changed at all. The only thing that changed is the animation they're containing. Once again, the yellow layers are the ones that has the changes in them. Let's start with the background layer. At 2 seconds mark, it's got a scale down and the opacity goes down. The blur has no changes at all. And let's go to the outer ring. Once again, all changes begin at 2 seconds mark. We've set the stroke width. The original was 15, and we've set it over the course of, well, almost 2 seconds to 30. We doubled it. Wings bottom and wings top. Now this is the real interesting change here. We animate the scale, rotation, and opacity to get a smaller wings until we get to this point. And on top of that, the pupil, we've animated its colors from light to dark. So this is the displacement map base. Let's switch over to the displacement map. Here we got a lot more changes. In the old displacement map, we had just the original displacement map base, and on top of it, we added just a mask. Same thing here, only this time we've added some changes. We'll start with the first one, which is texture from 2 seconds mark, and we animated it from 0 to 5%. On top of that, we have the effects layer. The effects layer contains a posterize and a fast blur animation. Let's for a minute there hide the fast blur and hit U so we can see the animation. Now the animation here is again 2 seconds, but it starts over at 1 second point. And what the posterize gives us is basically it takes the ramp that we've got here, the transformation from white to light gray or dark gray, and it separates it to what seems to be defined solids. So we got a light gray, mid-tone gray, and dark gray. This transformation is a bit edgy, and you can see its anti-aliasing is really poor. So we'll set fast blur to get a bit more of subtle edges. On top of that, we have the pupil, which starts at 2 seconds. We'll hit U to see the animation. We've just set the opacity from 0 to 100 over the course of almost 4 seconds. Now, the fact that it's pure white will make the eye really jump out. On top of that, we have the evil mask. Now the evil mask is a very nice feature if we'll isolate it. The animation starts at 3 seconds and ends at 4. And let's isolate the ramp for a second there and hit M, isolate the first mask. It's just a round mask with a ramp applied to it from black to white. To that ramp we added a levels effect to make it a bit more distinct, and the fast blur to make it once again more blurry on the edges. We'll subtract another mask to give us this evil look, and all combined together gives us that very nice displacement to the hypno, which gives it that menacing evil look. So we covered the color map and the displacement map, and what's left is the reflection map. Once again, on the right side we have the old reflection map, and on the left we have the new reflection map. What's left the same is the still image of a brushed metal. On top of that we have the blur. In the old reflection map I used Nancy's office. Now, since the Hypno is flying in the sky, we have the sky here. On top of the blur we have the texture. Let's isolate for a second. The texture is basically a scratched metal texture. And the animation goes from 2 seconds to 4 seconds, from 0 to 100. On top of that we have the sky, which is the very same sky footage the Hypno is flying in. And it's placed in the middle, so we get the sky reflection just in the middle and not on the edges of the Hypno. And it has no animation. And on top of that, just a fast blur with the blurriness set to 6, and it has no animation as well. Now the fact that we're switching from the brushed metal to the scratched metal makes that much of a difference because it looks that much more menacing. That's the basic changes that were made between the old Hypno Precompilator and the attack mode Hypno Precompilator. So now let's close this up and switch over to the Hypno Precompilator to see what changes were made to the Shapeshifter plugin itself. So here we are again at the main composition. If I'll zoom in here a bit, you can see the posterize effect starting to take place in the displacement map. Let me just close some effects here because it's getting a bit heavy on the machine. And let me just close the sky as well. So now we're left only with the Shapeshifter effect. The pendulum and the interior are just sliders which are connected to the rigging of the Hypno Precompilator. And as I said, Matthias is going to cover that part, so I'm going to leave those as is. We are going to just focus on the animation that's creating the tail. Let's switch to custom view for a second there. So this is the Hypno Precompilator with the displacement map at its peak. At 3 seconds mark we've set a keyframe for the instances under generator. If I'll open up Shapeshifter, let's close all of these up. The bottom section is generator. Toggle dot down, we have instances. And over the course of 2 seconds, we've animated from 1, which is the default, to 16. And that, as you can see, added are 16 duplicates. We are duplicating on the Z-axis only. And we've also animated the instances offset on the Z-axis from 0 to 35 over 3 seconds, starting from second 3 to second 6. We've animated the spiral rotation from 0 to 15. The increment, if we'll toggle down the rotation, with the spiral rotation Z from 0 to 15. The incremental rotation on the Z-axis from 0 to -5. If we'll toggle down the scale, we've animated the incremental scale on all axes, X, Y, and Z, from 0 to 90. That is what causing the tail to shrink as it grows. So, that covers up the precompilator. Now let's switch over to the arterial part, which is created by form and optical flares. Okay, so I've reset the form layer, and now I'm gonna start at the beginning. Let's go to base form. In base form, we're gonna use sphere layered, not box layered. We are gonna use only one layer, not 3. We are gonna set the size to 300 on the X, Y, and Z. And further down the line, we are going to use 1000 pixels on the Y and the X, which is going to get really heavy on the machine. So at the moment, we'll leave it as is. We'll just maybe set it to 100 on 100, and further down the line, we'll set it to 1000. In 7 seconds and 15 frames down the timeline, we are going to create a keyframe for the X, Y, and Z size, as well for the center Z and for the particles in X and Y. Let's hit U to reveal those keyframes. And at the end of the animation, we are going to set the sizes to 250, size X, Y, and Z 250. We're going to set the particles to 200. Actually, we're just going to set it to 20. And then once again, this is just for easy rendering, because later on the ending frame will be 200 at the ending point and 1000 at the beginning. Actually, you know what? Let's do this right now. 7 seconds and 15 frames, we'll set the particles in X and Y to 1000, and at the end of the animation, we'll set it to 200. And we're gonna set the center Z at the end of the animation to -1000. So we'll get the whole particles burst at the camera. Let's create a nice little preview so we can see what we've got so far. So we've got the ball bursting at the camera. Not too interesting, but we can take it a bit further from that. Now let's close up the base form and go into particles. We are going to animate here only two things. We are going to make the size and the opacity. Now the animation is going to take place at the beginning, so let's go to the start of the layer and we'll set a keyframe for the size at 1 and for the opacity at 0. And let's randomize the size by 50. Okay, let's set a keyframe for the size and for the opacity, and in 7 seconds down the timeline we're going to set a keyframe for the size to be 2 and this opacity to 3 or 4. So let's see how that looks. Okay, this is getting closer to what we're after, right? It's not uncommon to use a very low opacity when you're using an extremely large amount of particles. That would actually help to give us that plasma look you've seen in the preview. Now let's close our particles and head over to Quick Maps. In Quick Maps, I've set the color map to be blue or mid-tone blue at the beginning, at the birth of the particles, and an orange, dark orange on the verge of brown at the end. We'll set the map opacity plus color overlay to Z axis, and this way if we'll create a new camera, Control Shift C and switch to view from the camera 2, this is our camera 1, and this is the front we're seeing just the blue, and in the back we've got the nice bright orange there. When the plasma explodes on the camera, that's when we'll see the orange. At the moment it's just hiding in the back, and we'll leave it as is for now. Let's switch over to map 1. We'll set the map 1 to not size but disperse strength, and we want to disperse over the Z axis once again. For the disperse, we don't want to disperse all at once, we want to disperse as it is in this template, this mountain-like template. So nothing at first, goes to 100 and down to 0 once again. Now at the moment it's set to 100 but it has no effect, so if I'll switch it to 200, no effect, and 0, no effect as well. But switch it back to 100, if I'll go over to disperse and twist and then set the disperse to, let's say, 500, there we can see the disperse happening. If I'll set it to 0, no disperse, 200, full disperse. Let's switch to 100 again and switch to our camera 2. Here you can see the map shape taking place. If I switch to 50, you can see it a bit better. This is a very interesting shape you get from dispersing in this way. You can also disperse from front to back or just flip it to back to front, but I think this works best for me. Let's switch back to camera 1 and let's close this up. Now let's reveal all keyframes here. Let's go back to the beginning of the animation, and in the beginning of the animation we're going to set the map offset to 100 and set a keyframe for it, as well as for the disperse to 1000. Create a keyframe for that as well. We'll go to the 7 seconds point in time and set the map offset to 0, no offset, as well as the disperse and twist. We'll set it to 300, so we'll get a small amount of dispersing. Let's preview how this looks at the moment. So it's getting there, it's getting more interesting. We are missing at the moment the plasma lines we've seen in the preview, and we are going to take care of that right now. Let's close up quick maps and close up Disperse and Twist, and let's open up Fractal Field. Now in Fractal Field we have no animation whatsoever. However, we do have some adjustment to make. We're gonna displace by 100 pixels, which immediately gives us this lovely flowing look. We're gonna set the flow to -100, so we'll get a flow backwards from the point of view of the camera. We are using noise as fractal sum, and we'll set the f-scale a bit larger, 15, so we'll get a bit more displacing there, a bit more interesting look. Let's get a bit closer to fire, and we'll set the complexity to 10. This way we'll get a lot more wrinkles in the plasma. We're going to leave the octave multiplier as is, but we are going to scale up the octave scale to 2. That brings us a bit closer to the point we want. At the moment we can see the back of the sphere here. You can see the orange part. And we don't want to see that because that actually is behind the Hypno precompilator's body. So that part needs to be hidden. But we'll take care of that later on down the line. Let's take a look at how it looks at this point. Okay, so now we're definitely getting closer. This part makes the plasma seem as if the Hypno precompilator is forming it from thin air. That was the look I was after. And you don't get that look at this point. It only starts here. And to get closer to that look that I was after, I used the spherical field. So let's open up spherical field. We'll need to set the strength to 100. At the start of the layer, we'll set the scale X, Y, and Z all to 650. So 650 for all. Somewhere between those two group of keyframes, we'll set it to 0 for X, Y, and Z. So let's see how that looks right now. Okay, so now you can see it's more of a force field forming around the Hypno and then fires. And this was the look that I was after, but up to this point I wanted to get just the blue plasma, and just at this point I wanted to get that orange hot plasma forming. I want it to be visible just at this point, not before that. And the way to get around that is actually very simple. Over and under visibility, we have far vanish and far start fade. What those parameters control is when the particles start vanish. Right now, the far vanish is set to 20,000, and if I set it to 1,200, the whole backside is vanished now. But let's reset that. I want it to be a more automatic way. So to do that, I need to measure the distance between the camera and the form position. And to do that, I created a null, made it a 3D layer. The position of the base form is actually right now set to 640 by 360. So does the null. I'll click on the stopwatch next to the far vanish. And here's the little expression we're going to use. N, which stands for null, equals the null's position, semicolon, and C, which stands for camera, equals the camera's position. That's just setting parameters. I'm just telling that N is the null's position and C is the camera's position. Now what am I going to do with these parameters? I'm going to write length, open parentheses, N, comma, C, close parentheses, and that's it. So right now what I did is I've measured the distance between the N and C, which is the null's position and the camera's position, and I applied it to far vanish. So right now if I would move the null on the z-axis to the back or to the front, that would affect the visibility of the sphere, and that's actually exactly what I did to the animation. At about 4 seconds, I've set the position of the null to -200, and at about 7 seconds and 10 frames, I've set it to 0. And now the vanish starts strictly, and I want it to be a bit more subtle transformation, so I need to set the far start fade closer to the far vanish. I don't want it to be exactly the same point. I want it to be 50 frames before that. I'm going to use eye expressions to do that. We'll go to Window and start off eye expressions. We are going to use Simple Link. We go to Linking and Simple Link 1D. OK. We want to link far vanish, so let's link it. And we'll make sure we'll set the offset to -50. And we want to apply it to far start fade. Apply. And that's it. We get a smoother transition. Let's see how that looks now. Okay, so now this is definitely closer to what we've seen in the preview. We don't see the backside at all. It's forming from the air, and only when it shoots out we can see the backside. And the reason we can see the backside is that we've animated the center Z. Up to this point, center Z is at 0, same as the null, and from the point we start to make some distance from the null, we can see the backside. Now, to complete the effect, I've added optical flares. Frankly, it's just a glow, a streak, and some multi-iris, and a bit of a glow. And the animation, if isolated for a second, it starts a bit after the plasma is shooting out, just 2 frames later. And I've animated the brightness and scale from 0 to 100 for the brightness and 300 for the scale, which makes the whole thing explode out. Let's have a quick preview of how that looks. Okay, so that's it, folks. The next part of this tutorial is going to be hosted by Matthias from Memoworld, and he's going to show you how he rigged the Hypno precompilator using eye expressions only. It's a beautiful rig and very inspiring. That's it for me. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. I've been yapping at you for these last 20 minutes or so. Once again, my name is Ran Ben Avraham, and I'll see you next time.
Thanks, Ran. That was awesome. Look for part 2 where Matthias Moll uses eye expressions. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.